Yeah, turning now to that devastating shooting of two West Virginia National Guard members here in Washington, D.C. It happened just before Thanksgiving. President Trump says he has invited the family of U.S. Army Specialist Sarah Beckstrom to the White House, saying they are devastated by her loss.
Meanwhile, her colleague, U.S. Air Force Staff Sergeant Andrew Wolf, remains in critical condition. Now, this shooting has shaken the city, where soldiers have patrolled the streets for months under Trump's law enforcement surge. Our Max Marcilla joins us live from Farragut Square, where the shooting happened last week. And Max, what are we talking about when it comes to the type of changes people could be seeing today?
Well, good morning. Some of the changes we'll be able to see here from the streets, including the fact that MPD officers, DC police officers, are expected to work alongside the National Guard, accompany them as they continue their mission. The other thing is that while that is potentially a short-term change, maybe a longer-term change would be additional National Guard troops. We know that's the message coming from the White House, as President Trump has floated the idea and suggested bringing in hundreds of additional troops. It's worth noting we don't know where those troops would come from, and today, really since the shooting, we have seen a slight increase in the number of Guard members here in the district, but not nearly to the amount that the president has floated. So that's sort of some of the changes we could see on the ground as we begin this first full work week since the shooting. The other thing that we know is still going on is the legal battle, right? The D.C. Attorney General Brian Schwab took the Trump administration to court over the National Guard's deployment, and we know that just days before the shooting, a federal judge ordered the administration to end the deployment of troops. But that judge set a 21-day period for the administration to either comply or appeal, and that's why, despite the ruling, the Guard members are still here as they were here on Wednesday. Janine Pirro was asked whether the National Guard should be here, and here's how she responded.
I don't even want to talk about whether they should have been there. We ought to kiss the ground and thank God that the president said it's time to bring in more law enforcement to make sure that a city that had the fourth highest homicide rate in the country was that violence was quelled. I'm not even going to go there.
We know homicides are, in fact, down in the district. They were down before the National Guard was deployed. They have only continued to decrease since then. We also know, according to some new Washington Post reporting, that the arrest rate for homicides in the district is nearing a decade-plus high this year.
Max, back to the National Guard. What's been the reaction from them as far as feeling like there's any possible more additional threats to their members?
Yeah, Drew, this is something they've been talking about for a while. I want to read you something that we've learned. It came from that lawsuit. It was an exhibit in the lawsuit, a memo to the Guard members, and what it says is service members may, quote, expect a heightened threat environment, including, quote, nefarious actors engaging in grievance-based violence and those inspired by foreign terrorist organizations. According to that memo, they say they may view this latest deployment as an opportunity, and they encourage service members to report any threats.
All righty, Max, thanks so much. Really appreciate it. Now, President Trump is taking an even tougher stance on immigration after that shooting.
Yeah, the administration is halting all decisions related to asylum claims and is promising visas for people traveling with Afghan passports and pausing visas for people traveling on Afghan passports. And cabinet members of the administration claim the suspected shooter was radicalized after arriving in the U.S. Ramanullah Lakanwal entered the U.S. as part of Operation Allies Welcome in 2021. That program was put in place by the Biden administration to help resettle Afghans who supported the U.S. military during the 20-year war. The move was intended to provide refuge to people who have been at risk following the Taliban takeover.
But that policy and its vetting are being questioned by the Trump administration. News Nation's Jackie Coppell joins us this morning to break it all down. Great to see you here, Jackie.
Good to be with you this morning.
So, you know, there were a lot of people in Washington, as we saw in that memo, who weren't surprised that it happened. Devastated, but not particularly surprised. How does this move forward in terms of the administration and Congress? And does there seem to be any thought that we don't need so many troops here despite the increase?
Well, I think that ultimately, you know, as you said, this wasn't necessarily a surprise in the sense that it is one person who committed an atrocious act. But in terms of a larger picture, a lot of the advocates of these Afghans say, look, this was one man, this is one horrible tragedy, but please don't paint a broad brush over all of these people who were ultimately allies of the U.S. military and helped our military do their jobs in Afghanistan, and they were crucial. So many of them were crucial to helping protect. I've spoken with a lot of members of Congress, other veterans, and they've said how necessary these Afghans were to helping keep people safe. And when I say keep people, I mean the troops.
There's something like 200,000 Afghans in the U.S. Following the decades-long war there and this evacuation. Do you have a sense of how much vetting went into all these people, and will there be some effort to kind of re-examine those people that are in the country?
So there are different ways that people came in, and therefore there were slightly different vetting processes. There's something called the special immigrant visa. That is an example, and that, by the way, is lawfully, that must continue. So even though the administration has paused visas, there will likely be some lawsuits over this because it is a law that these visas do need to continue to be processed. But that is quite an intense vetting process. For those who are granted asylum, much like this suspect was, he was granted asylum earlier this year in April of 2025 under the Trump administration, although he applied for asylum under the Biden administration. For asylum, it's background checks, biometric vetting, social media vetting, in-person interviews, and risk assessment. And this suspect was effectively approved by the CIA as well. He had worked with the CIA in Afghanistan. And so it was quite intense for a large number of people, but for people who came over with Operation Allies Welcome, which was the Biden program that brought some of these folks right after the U.S. withdrawal, those folks were not vetted as much. And so there is some concern that those people in particular, maybe they have to go back and look, although the Trump administration is saying we want to look at everyone. But for the vast majority of people who did come here, they were vetted quite intensely.
Drew and I were talking about this earlier, but it would be fascinating to see the tick-tock of the vetting process. What happened between January and April? Is there further vetting that continues right up until the moment? Because we heard the administration, Kristi Noem and other people this weekend, just blaming the Biden administration. They did a lot of the vetting, but 4 months.
Yes, and ultimately, like I said, he was approved, he was granted asylum under the Trump administration. And so my guess is the administration is looking at their protocols to see how did he effectively slip through the cracks. Were there programs that existed or didn't exist that could have maybe caught him? And something that I want to add regarding these immigrant visas. So oftentimes when people, as I'm told, particularly from an organization called Afghan Evac, but several organizations that work with Afghans, they are required to show paperwork to prove that they actually worked with the U.S. military. But one of the reasons this has taken so long for so many tens of thousands is because when the U.S. pulled out, we actually advised people to destroy and burn said paperwork to make sure that the Taliban couldn't find ways that they had helped the U.S. So these people are struggling to find ways to prove that they helped the United States. It's quite complicated.
I know I've spoken with soldiers who fought in Afghanistan who have developed really close relationships. Oftentimes these are their translators that they took out on missions to help them speak to local people in villages and stuff like that. I think we have a soundbite from Senator Van Hollen from Maryland kind of talking about what those people would face if they were sent back to Afghanistan.
I do think it is outrageous and unfair to try to punish an entire class of people for the evil acts of one person. That is collective punishment. These are individuals who worked side by side with America in the fight against the Taliban. And if they were sent back now, the Taliban may likely kill them.
I expect there would be some pushback from the military if there was some broad effort to just kind of ship people back to Afghanistan.
Absolutely. I mean, the support for these Afghans is quite bipartisan, particularly those who served in the military and are in Congress now. But generally speaking, there's an understanding that the United States made a promise to these people, and that if you renege on that promise, not only does that potentially harm all of these Afghans, but it actually influences our reputation for the long term. And what that means is if there are future conflicts, if we need local help, which you always need when you're in a foreign country, if people don't feel like the United States is an ally and an honest broker, and if the United States says, hey, we'll protect you, and then they don't, there's a good chance that those locals in the future will not help the U.S. and could even, as I'm told, could even help, our adversary. So there is a short-term picture and then a long-term one as well, and a lot of people are pointing to the long-term, just as the senator was talking about.
Jackie, thanks so much. We'll talk to you in an hour.